you know, we still need the stories, whether we read modern novels or not. It's like, we need that connection, whether it's with our elders or with our kids. We pass these stories on as something precious. For me personally, it's probably just the unknown. I've always been drawn more to the unknown and whatever the beyond of normal life. So I would actually go out and look for these. We would go to haunted houses. We would go to haunted areas of the cities, see what was going on. Yeah. Now, whatever that comes from, I don't know, but it kept life interesting.
It was almost like an escape.
Definitely an escape. Family life was not a happy life, so that was an escape. Oh, definitely.
Hey, welcome to the Floaties for Krakens podcast. I am your host, Camille Maria Costa, and it is a brilliant day to be monstrous. Hi, Cuddlefish. Welcome back to Season 2, Episode 13 of Floaties for Krakens. Hi, happy May. What a beautiful month that we're in. Gosh, there's so many things to celebrate in the month of May. One thing of which that I'm very passionate about is Happy Mental Health Awareness Month. How incredible, right? I personally believe that mental health awareness should be every single day, but I think it's very powerful and exciting that we can dedicate an entire month to raising awareness and crafting paths of activism to remind people to be kind to their minds. So if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, hug yourself, hug your brain. I know sometimes we get mad at the brain, and I know sometimes it feels very frustrating to become friends with your brain. 9 times out of 10, it's just trying its best. That other 1 out of 10, it's being interesting, but it's trying. But yeah, hello. Are you all ready for another scrumptious episode? This episode rocks. It is such a cool episode, and with an individual that is so freaking amazing and so freaking vital, not only to the world of monster studies, but I think in the world of teachers. This is one of the most incredible teachers I think I've ever met, with such a kind heart and passion for the students that he teaches. So I want to introduce you to Dr. Michael M. Chemers. So Dr. Michael M. Chemers is professor and chair of the Department of Performance, Play and Design at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where he teaches classes on theater history, dramaturgy, and monsters in performance. I mean, come on, right? He's also the director of the Center for Monster Studies. Did you hear that again? The Center for Monster Studies. And I know, which hosts an annual international conference of monstrous scholarship and produces a podcast called The Show Where They Talk About Monsters. He's the author of The Monster in Theater History, This Thing of Darkness, and the co-editor with Ana Lola Santana of Monsters in Performance, Essays on the Aesthetics of Disqualification and the Figure of the Monster in Global Theater History. I mean, come on, right? Also, all of this stuff is going to be linked below, don't you worry, but we're really going to dive into, I think, all of the creative and amazing paths that Michael has created for so many people that are passionate and nerdy and excited about monsters, and it's brilliant. It's so freaking cool, and I'm really excited for y'all to listen to this episode and learn about the work that he does, but also learn about how monsters are lighthouses. I say that a lot, I know, but for you and your mind, right? For mental health. And I don't know, for just being a human. I think it's so interesting that monsters can help us learn more about that, right? So he is so incredible, and I really encourage you all to check out his stuff and all of the stuff for monster studies. I mean, come on, it's so cool, and I think you all will agree that he's brilliant and definitely in the right place teaching children and students um, about themselves. And I'm just I'm so proud of him, even though we just met, and I'm so thankful that students get to learn from him, because it's lucky. It's so amazing. Um, Ladies and cuddlefish, let me introduce to you Mindfulness for Werewolves. Well, hi.
Hi.
Welcome to the Floaty Show.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm very honored to be on the Floaty Show and big fan. And so it's
Oh,
a great opportunity for me to get on here and talk to you, Camille.
well, we're honored. We're so excited, and I have so many questions
Sure.
to ask you today. Obviously about our monsters, but more importantly about your life and your journey to the world of the spooky. So I'm very excited, Michael, to
Okay.
get into the spooky parts of your brain to see how that works.
All right. Well,
Um,
it's a wild ride. Let's do
can't wait.
it.
Great. Well, for people that may not know you, who are you? What do you do? What's your life like?
Well, my name is Dr. Michael Chemers. I am a professor of dramatic literature in the Department of Performance, Play, and Design at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And my background is in theater history and dramaturgy. But in the past, like 6, 7 years, I've really engaged deeply in the study of monsters, and I've published several books on the subject. Specifically, I'm looking at monsters in performance, how they manifest themselves in different types of performance art. But I have a pretty wide ranging curiosity, I think, about this, and I'm sort of omnivorous in terms of what kind of monster information I get. I just am crazy about monsters, and I think it's very healthy to immerse yourself in the strange,
Absolutely. Oh,
psychologically
that's so
healthy.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And how did the world of as a former theater kid, that makes me very
Oh,
excited. How
good.
did the world of theatrics and storytelling and dramaturgy find you as well?
Well, oh, how did I get involved in theater? You mean?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I've been involved in theater since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
I just feel very called to work in theater. I was an actor first in high
Yeah.
school, and then I experimented with playwriting, and I did my MFA in playwriting at Indiana University. So I
Gotcha.
do have some plays out there, some adaptations of classic texts that
Yeah.
you can get. Um, but um, but then I discovered scholarship. The deep historical and theoretical engagement with the theater, with performance in general. And I
Right.
just love that even more than playwriting, even more than acting, although I still do those things occasionally.
Sure.
But really, my identity now is as a historian, you
Wow.
know.
That's amazing. That's so cool. What a fun journey.
It's been great. I love the theater. I love working with theater people.
Yeah.
I love the theater departments in universities are great, and I
Yeah.
love the
Yeah.
students. The students are just the best, you know.
Aren't they just?
Yeah,
I feel like that's the best part of being a
absolutely,
teacher.
no question, no question. And our students here at UCSC are terrific.
Oh, I bet.
they're very, apart from being very talented and dedicated, they're also really interested in political issues,
Oh,
environmental issues, social justice issues. So
good.
their work as theater artists is really grounded in real world situations, and I really like that a lot.
That's so awesome. I bet there's nothing but brilliant stuff coming from your school. And I get so excited thinking about up and coming new generations of, just artists in general, I think.
Hmm.
But I think COVID, it was such a complicated time
Yeah.
and such a difficult time for people.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think one of the silver linings of it all was the art that like came from very
Hmm.
difficult moments, right? And so I don't know. I've seen some of the best stuff come out from the past few years, and I'm just so excited. And I bet you see that every day with your students.
It's true. Yeah, COVID was a real downer for the theater industry, and for the art in general. We couldn't
Yeah.
congregate at the university, so we couldn't make theater together. So we did some
Oh,
online stuff, which was okay. but not what we wanted to do. And then
Yeah.
of course the industry nationwide took a huge hit. It was something like 50%
Mm,
of theater jobs in America were lost
yeah.
during COVID. So we're clawing our way back. We're coming back. You can't kill the theater.
Never.
It's been, it's just not. It's too hard to kill. So
Yeah.
plagues have stopped us before, but only temporarily.
Only for brief seconds, and
Only
then you
for
got to write a play about it. So.
exactly, absolutely, yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
that's so great. That's so great. And I know you mentioned, kind of exploring the world of monstrosity and performance. I'm really curious. Before I kind of get into how you found spookiness, whether that was like strictly through theater or in other ways growing up, I'm curious. What is your definition of this concept of performance, right? Like, I
Ooh.
think that, I mean, I'm sure there you have so many different definitions and ways to express performativity and things, but
Hmm.
I'm curious what draws you to that world of performance.
Wow. Well, that is a really difficult question these days. What is performance? That's a huge topic that we in the scholarly world argue about constantly. So, what? How can I introduce this concept in a way that doesn't diminish it? Performance can mean a lot of things now. I think when I was coming up, it was about liveness, right? There was a sense of liveness, although we didn't know that it was liveness. We just did performance, right? We didn't understand that there was another way to do performance that wasn't live, right?
Right. Right.
Uh, which is not to say that we weren't aware of things like film, right? Which is
Yeah.
performance that's not live. But the whole concept of the kind of work that I mean, the big draw for me was presence, right?
Mm,
Live actors in a space with a live audience engaging in a very particular kind of artistic interchange, right?
mm.
That the actors can feed off the audience feeds off the actors, and it's a very unique type of event. But
Yeah.
what we've discovered in the past 20 years is that there are many different kinds of liveness, right? That you can be live through the marvels of computer technology as well, right? Through computational media. Like, for instance, you and I are in different parts of the country, but
Right.
in some sense, we are together.
Right.
In a virtual sense, we are together,
Yeah.
and we can react to each other, and we feed off each other, and we engage with each other. And it's not the same thing as being in the same place at the same time, but it is
Right.
something. and
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that the ways that we participate in things that are require performance, or things that are based on performance, has changed over the
Mm.
past 20 years, and our definitions need to become more expansive to include that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said. Absolutely. It's like you said, it's alive, right? This
Alive.
idea of ebbing and flowing and changing, and that's the beauty of it.
Yes.
And I love that you utilize the idea of connectivity too, like
Hmm.
connection and working
Right.
off each other. Because you're absolutely right. That's so true. And I don't know. I love the idea of performance. I think
Mm.
it's so brilliant. And when because I accidentally stumbled upon, getting a folklore degree. I didn't know that you could. I didn't
Uh-huh.
know anybody could master in something like that. And I was
Yeah.
so excited when I found out you could. And I remember we read a book on the idea of performance, but
Hmm.
in the folkloric sense, right, of like how people dress every day to perform some sort of identity, right, for
Yes.
example.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it just opened my mind to like how many ways people um, not only love to this idea of performance and putting on a show, if you will, but for many people it's survival, right? This
Mm.
idea of connecting and
Hmm.
and living and working with one another
Hmm.
and being human in that way. And so I love that you teach this, and I love that you explore it with your students and
Hmm.
through your writings, and I think that's so cool. That's
Thank
so
you.
great.
Thank you so much. And there's an interesting segue into monsters here. I think because monsters need to be manifested, right? They don't
Mm,
exist outside of their manifestations as cultural products. So they have to be embedded in folklore, and then
yeah.
not just written down, but performed, right? They have to be
Mm,
embodied. They have to develop immediacy in order to be super effective, right, in their roles as monsters. So they need to be like, reading a book of folklore is one thing, but listening to the elder tell the story of a creation story around the fire that has monsters in it is a completely different experience, right?
Totally different. You're
And
immersed.
you're immersed, exactly. And monsters need to constantly be re-embodied, re-performed, reincarnated over and over and over again in order to maintain their effectiveness, right? And their vibrancy. So, for me, looking at monsters and looking at performance is really two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love that idea of manifestation. You're so right. And well, okay, before we go any deeper, I am curious, what is your definition of a monster, Michael?
Well, that is a really good question, also, and one that is hotly debated in the field of monster studies. But I favor a copious definition of monsters
Okay.
because I want to have as few limits on my curiosity as possible.
Good.
However, I do think that monsters are cultural bodies, and that's Jeffrey Jerome Cohen's first thesis. If of course, you've read Jeffrey Jerome Cohen's
Absolutely.
Seven Theses, Monster Culture Seven Theses, which he wrote in 1996, and kind of inaugurated the field of monster studies by doing
Right.
that. And his first thesis is the monster's body is a cultural body.
Mm.
And I think that this is critically important to keep in mind, right? That monsters exist in our culture as characters in stories, as metaphors, as psychological manifestations of psychological impulses, as not any number of things, and it goes a lot deeper than that, obviously, right? Than just those things, although that's deep enough.
Yeah.
Um, but they don't exist as material beings, and this is really important because when you get involved with identifying material beings as monsters, you are then opening the door to legitimizing atrocity, right? So, for instance, if you want to call all Jews monsters, right, that is the first step that you need to do towards committing atrocity against that population, because you say, okay, well, they're not human, so therefore whatever I do to them is justified, right? So it's very important not to confuse that first thesis at all. But people do it all the time. I mean, we're constantly doing it. We constantly do it. It's happening right now nationwide.
Yes.
In discussions about immigration, in discussions about the war in Gaza, the monsterization of groups is prevalent, and we need to, as scholars and as artists, I think we absolutely need to guard against that at every step. Right, that is our function in the world, is to call out that kind of behavior and to redress it to the extent that we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's horrible. I mean, and as you mentioned, it's been happening forever,
Yeah.
right? And,
Oh yeah.
and it's so disgusting. It's so horrible. And I think that's what's so interesting about trying to define the word monster
Mm-hmm.
is just depending on the context that can change, depending on who says it, who gets to call who a monster and who has
Exactly.
that privilege.
Mm-hmm.
It changes with a drop of a hat, you know?
Absolutely. I was giving a lecture at a society called the Penny University, which is a group of mostly left-wing thinkers. And they said, they asked me, is Donald Trump a monster? And I said, look, I don't agree with Donald Trump or his policies, but he's not a monster. He's a human being, right? And it's important to remember that although you could certainly say that some of the things he does are monstrous, he's a human being, born of human parents, and we need to reckon with that, right? For good and ill. Yeah.
Which is so hard.
Which is
Which
very
is
hard.
so hard, right?
It's very hard.
And that's the thing. And I mean, I know for a fact that you love monsters
I
just as
do.
much as I do too, right? Like there's so much comfort, which we'll be talking about today, right? So much comfort and solace and freedom, and also like, I don't know, acceptance of yourself that you can
Yes.
find with
Yes.
monsters and
Yes.
monstrosity,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
And yet it's, God, when you are wronged by something or someone or policies, what have you, right? It can feel so easy to just be like,
Exactly.
right? And that's so hard. That is so difficult. And I think that's what's been so fun talking to you all experts about this stuff is like not only each of your definitions and interpretations of monster,
Hmm.
but that all of you so far have said, right, it's not that simple.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it changes
yeah.
all the time.
That is one thing that monster scholars, I think, share in common is the sense that it is not simple, right? But the way I look at it is, if you look at the monster and see the other, as it were,
Yeah.
then you're in. Then you're. Oops, I have
Oh,
balloons.
fun.
Where did that come from?
I
um,
don't know, but I loved it. That,
if I do this,
that was great.
okay.
Maybe a
Anyway,
new computer update. Love that.
yeah, I don't know what happened, but I don't know if
Right.
you want to keep that or cut it out in post. I don't know.
Oh, always keep it.
All right. But if you look at the monster and see the other,
Yeah.
then you're engaging in what I call the dark art of monstrosity, right? Of monsterization. With apologies to J.K. Rowling, but if you look at the monster and see yourself, then you're on the cusp, as you say, of tremendous discovery and growth. Right? It's really astonishing. So to me, that's the dichotomy. Those are the two edges of the sword that is the monster.
Oh yeah. Such a difficult conversation, but in the best way. Like I just feel like so much growth comes from these conversations.
Yeah, very cool.
Necessary growth.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you remember, Michael, like your first introduction to the world of monsters?
Um, I remember being 3 years old and terrified that a werewolf was going to get me
Oh
when I
jeez.
when I was asleep.
Oh
And
no.
largely because there was this. Maybe I was 5. I don't know. 3 seems pretty young, but there was a tree outside my window. It was a blue spruce. And I don't know if you can imagine a blue spruce, but it looks like at night when you can't see it very well, it looks like hundreds of wolf muzzles.
Oh my gosh.
And so I thought it was like a wolf tree that it was
Oh my gosh.
out there, and it was, and this is a tree that of course I played under constantly when I was in the daytime, but
Right.
at night it became a wolf tree, and it was really, really scary. And so for me,
Oh jeez.
it was always werewolves, most
Wow.
of all. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. At such a young age too.
Right.
Oh,
But at the same time, I was also really attracted to these notions, right? I was scared, but I
yeah.
was also attracted. And I think that largely is because as I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah,
Okay. Yeah.
in the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
and I'm Jewish, so it was a hard place to grow up. It was a place where there was a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of hatred, a lot of isolation. And
Yeah.
when you're a kid, you don't really realize that that's not personal, right? That somebody
Mm,
says to you, you can't play with us, or
mm.
beat you up on the playground also while the teachers watch. I mean, it
Oh,
was rough. It was it wasn't any fun.
yeah.
And they would ask me where my horns were, or if it was true that I had
Mm,
black blood, that kind of thing. And
mm,
so the notion of playing the monster, the notion of embodying the monster, is actually one that gave me a sense of power
mm.
and resistance
Yeah.
against this sort of bullying that I was experiencing as a child. And
Yeah.
so even as I was scared of monsters, I was also really attracted to them, and I sort of immersed myself in the strange even as a youngster. and
Yes.
uh and I think that that's really healthy psychologically. We were just talking about that. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with that hatred and such strong hatred
Well,
as
thank
a
you. I
child.
appreciate that, but it did make me weird, and I'm deeply thankful that it made me weird.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I agree. I'm right there with you. I mean, there's nothing better than having a best friend and a monster, I
Yeah.
think. And like you said, you grow those horns, you grow those scales or that mangy tail or whatever, what have you, right? Whatever your monster is, right?
Hmm.
It's just notches on the board of your strength and resilience.
Right.
And you need that
Right.
in a very complicated world,
Yeah,
you
for sure.
know?
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I think that's lovely that you were able to have friends in those monsters.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Okay, so I've been dying to ask you as well. How did the Center of Monster Studies come about? Like, what is this? I'm just so fascinated by it.
Well, the Center for Monster Studies is a research center at the University of California, Santa Cruz. We are funded mainly by the Office of Research at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and the Arts Research Institute and the Humanities Institute. And so these are all funding organizations that exist within the university to support research.
Amazing.
And basically, what happened was the way that this started was we were doing a production at my theater department of,
Yeah.
of Frankenstein. And it was the 200th anniversary of the publication of Frankenstein. It was actually the 201st anniversary. We missed it because,
Yeah,
but it
that's
was
fine.
2019. And I had been teaching this class on monsters at the university ever since I came. And so the chair of my department came to me and he said, "Would you do something about Frankenstein that was like that's scholarly, right? Like do
Yeah.
a group of scholars talking about Frankenstein that we can do along with the show, right?"
Love it.
I said, "Yeah, that sounds really, really fun." And so I thought I was going to do like one panel, right? But the response that I got, I reached out to the campus community, and the response that I got was so vibrant that we wound up doing 2 whole days of stuff, of
So
panels,
cool.
expert panels, people presenting their research, people talking about Frankenstein, people talking about all kinds of other things. We did a screening of Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein, the James Whale films from the
Oh my
30s,
gosh.
and we did
Yes.
expert commentary on them afterwards, right?
Yes.
And we called it Frankencon.
I love that.
Yeah,
Oh, that's incredible.
it was super fun, and we had
Yeah.
posters, and it was all kinds of stuff, and so it really turned into this huge thing. So the response that I got from the campus community about this was so encouraging.
Yeah.
And it also put me in touch with other scholars at UC Santa Cruz who are doing monster stuff, right?
Right,
And I'm
right.
talking about scholars from not just theater arts, of course, but history, literature, game design, film, uh, digital media studies,
Amazing.
anthropology, sociology, and there's a couple more that I can't remember off the top of my head. Critical race and ethnic studies.
Oh, wow.
That people's work intersects with monsters across the board, right?
Yeah.
So across the humanities and the arts. But I have just recently been contacted by some of my colleagues in biology who are interested in doing some work on
Oh my
monsters.
gosh.
Yeah, so that's actually pretty cool.
Yes.
Because we're actually getting the hard sciences involved now. Well, anyway, so long story short,
So cool.
after Frankencon, I went and I applied for a major grant from the university, and in order to found this Center for Monster Studies with the
Oh my
faculty who were involved with the Frankencon program, and we did it and we put it together, and now every year we do a Festival of Monsters conference
Yes.
where we have scholars from all over the world come and talk about their work in monsters, and they come here to beautiful Santa Cruz, and we have a lovely conference.
That's amazing.
We also do a public day of that conference for anybody to come. You don't have to be a scholar to come, but just anybody can come and enjoy the monstrosity.
Love it.
We have a partnership with a local company that makes horror props and costumes for movies called Trick or Treat Studios,
Oh my
who
God.
have been very generous with us, and they have they give us masks and monster statues and stuff to put around the space where we're doing the talks. And that's been really, really fun. So we do that every year, and we also produce a podcast called The Show Where They Talk About Monsters.
Right, right. Which we will link all of this down below, by
Oh,
the
good.
way.
Okay, great, great. Yeah,
Yes, that's so cool.
yeah,
Oh
and
my God.
we're growing, we're expanding, we're always talking about new ideas. We're eventually hoping that we could come up with a minor, a study, so that you could get your degree in literature with a minor in monster studies.
Are you kidding me?
Nope.
That's freaking cool.
Don't you
It
wish
has
you had
been
that?
yes! Just throw my laptop. Absolutely. Like, it been my dream. Like, I've always dreamt, like, literally, right, making the real life version of Monsters University, right? Like, that
Right.
idea of making
Exactly.
a full school
That's what we're
all
doing.
about it. Ah, so cool, Michael. That's
Thank
so
you.
congratulations, because that's so exciting.
Thank you.
And God, I can only imagine like how fun those conferences are and just how much the public and the students and the teachers, like, clearly you're impacting the university, right? And it's just so freaking amazing. How
Yeah, thank
fun.
you. Thank you so much. We do have a lot of
Yes.
fun. It's a lot of work, but we have a lot
Oh,
of
I
fun.
bet.
Yeah.
I bet. And congratulations on getting that grant too. Grant writing is insane.
No,
So
yeah, no kidding.
good job.
Yeah, we're always on the hustle, you know,
Oh, I bet.
but UCSC is a place where this sort of weird research is really supported and nurtured.
So, oh, thank goodness for that. I
Yeah.
mean, that's beautiful to see.
Yeah.
Truly beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, that's badass. That's so cool. Oh my gosh. Please keep me updated if you all are still, if you get any information about that minor. Just
Okay,
keep
will
me
do.
updated because that's great
Absolutely.
news.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
absolutely. That'll be a few years, I think, before we can put that together. But
Fair enough. That's okay.
thank
Even I'm not kidding, Michael. If I have to go back to school to get a minor, I'd do that because that's how cool that is. So cool.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So gosh, so your world has definitely been encapsulated by the world of monsters, both
Yes.
being afraid but also befriending them in some way.
Yeah.
And it seems that you always circle back to the werewolf.
I
So,
do.
Michael, what is a werewolf?
Wow, what's a werewolf? Well, again, that is a really deep question because the werewolf is one of the oldest monsters. I
Yeah.
talk about this on my podcast. The vampire says it's really old. You know, vampires are always like, "I am so old," but vampires only go back to the 14th century,
Yeah.
and werewolves go back to prehistory, right?
Mhm.
So ancient Greeks talked about werewolves.
Yeah.
The ancient Persians talked about werewolves. The Dacians, um, uh, modern day Iran, of course, is where Persia was,
Yeah.
um, and um, and all the way through Europe there were werewolves, and there are werewolves also in analogs in different cultures as well. Like in Africa,
Mm.
you have were jackals and were lions.
Yep.
In India, you have rakshasa or were tigers. Um,
Yeah.
in the American Southwest, you have skinwalkers who become coyotes and other animals, and in South America, you have were jaguars.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah, so this notion that human beings can get in touch with their bestial nature to the point where they can actually transform into beasts
Yeah.
and then transform back, that is a very, very old idea. Very, very old
Mm.
idea and a very human one that sort of transcends culture. Yeah.
Which arguably makes it so frightening.
Yeah.
There's a version, no matter who you are, where you are in the world, there's a version.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll find something.
Oh man.
Yeah. In Japan, you have
Okay,
the
so
fox women.
oh yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. The changing. Oh my gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what if you're thinking about your idea, your version of a werewolf that you're drawn to the most? What does that werewolf look like?
Well, so I'm a product of the 20th century in America, and so the werewolves that I grew up with
Yeah.
are human beings who transform into this sort of hybrid shape, a man wolf shape, and then they have tremendous power to take what they want, to
Mm,
feed, to do all kinds of things that they normally would be repressed from doing because of their social consciousness, right, as humans. But
mm,
so there's a tremendous amount of power in the werewolf. The werewolf takes what it wants, right, and doesn't
yeah.
feel guilt, and doesn't
Mm,
feel remorse.
yeah.
It just is. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of attractiveness in that, and that attractiveness is also super scary.
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
I also think of the werewolf as being somebody like Lon Chaney's Wolfman from 1941, I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, where he is this guy who for 29 days out of every month lives in fear of what he's going to do on that 30th day, right? And
Jeez.
that's also really, I find that a very compelling image.
Yeah.
It resonates with me personally very powerfully.
Yeah.
So and that's a funny thing because the whole phase of the moon thing, that's a very modern addition to the werewolf myth that shows up in a movie from 1935, I think, called Werewolves of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was no relationship between werewolves and moons prior to that, even though werewolves
Right.
go back all the way to the ancient times. You know?
It just happened.
Yeah, it just came
Yeah.
out in a movie, and then people were like, "Oh yeah, werewolves and moons, absolutely,
Association.
association,
Yeah.
exactly." And now the werewolf and the moon are linked,
One
but
and the same.
one and the
Yeah.
same, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the werewolf has a lot of pathos, and I'm really
Mm.
really attracted to that kind of power and pathos.
Yeah, and you're right. I guess I never really thought about that, like never fully satisfied,
Exactly.
right, kind of quality
Hmm.
to that. And I guess the only other word for that is right, that's animalistic
Hmm.
kind of nature.
Yeah.
And and I'm curious too, what are the rules for werewolves? And I know that probably changes depending on the story or when it came out, right? But like, how does one become a werewolf
Hmm.
or change into one? Do they have the ability to change back and forth? Do they kill anybody? Things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on what era you are, what culture you're in.
Yeah.
The ancient Greeks had the story of a king of Arcadia named Lycan, which is where we get
Mm.
our term lycanthrope, right?
Right. Right.
Um, which means shape of lichen, I believe. That's what that means. And so Lycan was this king who was visited by Hermes and Zeus in disguise as mortals, and in order to test their divinity, he served them his own children in a stew, right? Which is a
Right.
stupid thing to do anyway. But but
Right.
but as a result, he was then transformed into a wolf by Zeus's power, and as a punishment for that transgression,
Mm.
um, his descendants also became wolves for 1 year out of every seven. And so
Mm.
there was this sense that Arcadians from that family were werewolves. And in fact, in the first Olympics,
Yeah.
the winner of the boxing competition was a guy named Demarcus the werewolf. So
Really?
it says that it's written in stone on a stela.
Oh my gosh.
Demarcus the werewolf. So that's that. In the Middle Ages, being a werewolf was just being a type of witch. It was just a type of witch where you would use a magical spell or magical girdle, magical grease that you would rub all over yourself in order to
Mm.
become a wolf,
Yeah.
and change back at will. So that was something that was totally at will, right?
Yeah.
And it's only much later that we get this idea that werewolfism is sort of a disease, right? Lycanthropy is sort of
Mm.
a disease that you get, that you
Yeah.
transform, or a curse, right? That you
Yeah.
transform into a wolf against your will, and then become this ravening beast,
Yeah.
which you then horribly regret later, right? That's a
Yeah.
20th century version of a werewolf, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, my definition of what a werewolf is pretty copious,
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Again, that idea of it's alive, it's
it's
changing.
it's messy. Yeah,
It's
and it's
very
it's always
messy.
changing. And then you've got like Jacob from Twilight, right? It's like
Yeah.
completely different kind of monster as far as I'm concerned. The Twilight monsters are lacking in pathos in my view. Don't get me
Yeah.
started on Twilight. Uh,
I
but
love it.
for him, like there's also this sense that the transformation of a human into a wolf is a painful and horrible thing, right?
Yes.
But not for
Yes.
Jacob. Not for Jacob. He
Nope.
just like basically it's a full body sneeze, and he
Yeah.
turns into
Boom.
this giant wolf. Yeah,
Yeah. It's all beautiful.
it's all
All of
beautiful,
it.
right? Exactly.
That is a good point though. I think gosh, I feel like this is well, you could argue that almost any monster deals with pain in some
Yes,
version. You
yes,
really could.
yes.
But I think there is such a visceral, like, at least right in the pop culture references we've seen with werewolves, like the ones you've mentioned, there is that visceral change. There, it's painful, and you're like, you hear it and you see it, the transition from like screaming to howling, and then the
Yeah,
nails that change, or like
totally.
the hair growing and the
Hmm.
feet changing. Like there's,
Absolutely, yeah.
gosh, it's such a terrifying kind of, scene every single time.
It's great stuff. Yeah,
um
yeah.
Golly,
Because
yeah, yeah. And I also love your discussion too of kind of this idea of consensual changing
hmm
and non-consensual changing.
hmm
But also, as you mentioned earlier, kind of even the werewolves you talked about, where it's like on the 30th day, right? Like, what's gonna happen to me? Or like counting, or like 7 years, or like whatever it is, right? It is this idea that you're not fully in control
yes,
of who you are as a
exactly.
werewolf, you know?
Exactly. And I think that resonates with the fear that we all have as humans, that we're not fully in control, you know,
Yeah.
that we think of ourselves as scientific, rational beings who are capable of advanced, sophisticated thought. But the truth is, to scratch the surface, put us under stress a little bit, scare us if we get scared, and suddenly we lose all those faculties and we begin to behave like animals, you
Mm,
know.
yes.
And I think there's a lot of literature about that, a lot of movies about that, um,
Yeah.
the failure of humanity under stress, right? And so I think the
Mm,
werewolf really responds to that fear. The werewolf is an embodiment of that fear, that anxiety, that you're going to lose yourself, you know,
yes.
in your animalistic urges.
Yeah. It's such a vulnerable thing, I
Yeah.
feel like. And you do get kind of that feeling of like, a hurt puppy dog almost too. Because there
Mhm.
is that dog quality, right? That idea
Yeah.
that also weird play on man's best friend is always the dog.
hmm
And I don't know, it's just so complicated, and
hmm
there's so many layers to the
It's
idea of a
rich. Yeah.
werewolf. It's so rich.
It's very
It's
rich.
so great. I think it's
Yeah.
such a great monster that you've chosen. And although I am, sorry it chose you in that way in terms of being terrifying as a kid, but I think there might be a reason that it's in your life,
Oh
you
yeah,
know.
no question about it. The werewolf for me is a very powerful image that
Yeah.
I use as a metaphor to deal with my own issues, you know, my own
Yeah.
struggles, uh, and
Yeah.
and I'm just like I was so scared of werewolves until I was in my 30s, I think, you know, and I wouldn't even go to werewolf movies, and then
Yeah.
I realized that I wasn't afraid that the werewolf was going to eat me. I was afraid that I was going to become a werewolf.
Mhm.
That's what it was, right?
Mhm.
And after
Mhm.
that, I became like, "Oh my god, I love werewolves. I have to go see all the werewolf movies," you know? And
Yeah.
so, it was a great discovery for me, you know?
Yeah.
Kinda late in
Oh my
life, in my
god.
30s.
Hey, you know what? Whenever it happens, it's necessary and for a reason in
Yeah,
that way, you know?
yeah, for sure.
Would you mind, and you had a beautiful, when we were going back and forth talking about what monster you were going to choose, you had mentioned this idea too of your personal struggles with mental health. Would you
Yeah.
mind kind of opening up about that too?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So I was diagnosed in my 30s with general anxiety disorder,
Mm.
which means that I'm just sort of like, I feel anxiety for no particular reason, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And then I start casting around looking for reasons to feel anxious, like why am I so anxious, and I find reasons to to justify my anxiety, without realizing that it's just actually a sort of background noise, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and using the werewolf as a touchstone in my recovery from this I guess call it a disease,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
was extremely helpful. It was like it was extremely rich and fruitful to sort of think of myself in that same sort of uh, problem that the werewolf has, right? And sort of
Yep.
think of myself as I never thought of myself as a werewolf, of course, because monsters' bodies are purely cultural, but
Yeah. Mm.
that there were some really interesting metaphors and really interesting similarities that I could touch on in terms of getting to grips with this disease, and with uh, engaging in a healthful path
Mm.
away from it, right? and
Mm.
And so I really just fell in love with werewolves all over again, and really just sort of like embrace the culture, the werewolf culture, and it's been really, really
Yeah,
fun. Yeah, and
that's
it's been really healthy.
beautiful.
It's been a huge part of my recovery.
I'm so glad. That's
Thank
so
you.
amazing. Yeah, that no, truly, because I mean, we can shout it from the rooftops all day, right? It is so hard to find accurate representation of yourself.
Hmm.
Um, sure, in the media and pop culture, but also therapy is so expensive. Therapy
Yes,
is not talked about. Mental health isn't talked about
that's
enough
right.
for many of us growing up, right? Like, we don't really know how our brains function
Mm, mm,
fully, and it's terrifying. You feel so broken
yeah,
when you don't see another person that is like you, or
yeah,
and that's what monsters are for people,
yes,
right? It's like, and that's what's so amazing. And some people might find that so frightening, but it's like, no, like that's me. That is the first time I saw
right,
me
right,
depicted
right.
as something, as a being, and not only a being, but a strong person, right? A strong monster, a monster that can defend themselves,
Yes,
right? That is seemingly maybe in control in that narrative, right?
right.
Like there is just,
And that
oh,
owes.
yeah,
I
yeah.
was going to say that owes nothing to the normal hegemony, right? That doesn't have to conform, doesn't have to relent, doesn't have to submit. You know,
Oh.
in fact, that the standards of normal culture are insufficient, right? And that
Mhm,
we are
mhm,
better than that in a way. And that gives us
mm.
power. Yeah, absolutely. Did you have an experience like that yourself? Yeah,
Of course.
yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and it actually happened, with this show, I
yeah.
think, because I know I've always been attached to monsters in little ways, in different strange ways, and the way that I found monsters, first of all, like really dived into the love of them was because my dad used to tell me the story of La Llorona growing up.
Oh yeah, La Llorona.
And so that, and then I learned growing up that was his monster. I learned
Mm,
he had one, right? This idea of being sad and talking about it, not talking about it, as a strong machismo Mexican man, right?
mm,
Like this,
mm,
emotionality.
mm,
And
mm.
discovering that, was how this show became.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
when I was doing it and talking to you all, right, and talking to these guests about their discoveries and their monsters and like what gets them excited and things, I started realizing, much like you, all my life I have had extreme coulrophobia. I am very afraid of clowns. All my life I have just been so afraid. I hate them. I get so scared, and I
Clowns are
just,
scary.
God, oh, thank you.
Yeah. No,
Thank
clowns
you
are
so much.
objectively scary, right?
They're scary,
And
and
they know it.
thank you. And there is this, right, this sense of just uncertainty. And I decided to take upon myself to do research on them for
Mm,
once,
mm,
and kind of safely, learn about them and learn where they come from. And
mhm, mhm,
again, like you, I was finding all of these cross-cultural interpretations of what a clown is.
mhm, mhm.
And almost every interpretation, right, the epitome of them and who they are is this idea of backwardsness,
Yes,
this idea of turning things on their head.
yes.
And I, late in life, was diagnosed with pure OCD, and I didn't
Mm,
know what the hell that was,
mm, mm,
at all. It was
mm.
accidentally through COVID, when I was by
Wow,
myself and I felt like I was dying and going insane
wow.
because of all these intrusive thoughts in my brain, and I didn't know who I was, and I felt like I had a mask, right? This idea of painting a face and this idea of putting on a show, and it was
Mm,
just so disturbing to me. And
mm, mm.
after doing research like that, I started to find so much more relation, I think, and understanding
Yeah,
of that character, of that monster.
yeah.
And like you said, I I don't know how comfortable I am still sitting down and like watching it, for example. I don't know if I can do that yet, but it's given me the space,
Mm,
um, to figure myself out,
mhm.
and that safety. But also, I think, and I don't know if you feel this way, but because mental health is so hard to talk about, especially your own personal, what goes on in your mind, because
Yeah,
nobody can ever fully know that. But
right.
I found, like, when describing your own mental difficulties or complexities to other people, I find it easier now to like use metaphors of
Yes.
monsters. right?
Totally.
Like, have you seen this, or have you seen this movie, or
Right.
read
Kind
this
of like that.
story? Yeah, like
Yeah.
that. And they're like, "Oh, okay." Right? Like it's just easier to digest and maybe even laugh over it or
Hmm.
cry over it or feel over it. But
Definitely. Definitely.
I'm right there with you, Michael. Monsters have saved my life in so many different ways.
Well, that's wonderful. That is really
Yeah,
wonderful to hear, Camille. I'm really glad
thank
that you
you.
were able to find that strength in that process because
Thank
yeah,
you.
COVID was a dark time for everybody, right? We were so
God.
isolated and we were so, especially us who are extroverts, right? We were like the introverts adapted better, right?
They were fine and sad, of course, but they were okay.
Right.
And you don't realize how much you rely on, even if it's just going to get a coffee
No
and saying
kidding.
hi to the person getting you a coffee and saying thank you. Like, it
Totally.
is wild
Yeah.
how being alone
Hmm.
just really, man, that was rough.
Yeah.
That was rough. And I
Yeah.
think it also showed, I don't know if you felt this way, but I think it was so scary because for years before that, right, we would put on this front too of like, hey, woohoo, everything's good and fine and great, and I'm not going to think about myself because I'm
Hmm.
going to get distracted by other
Hmm.
people,
Right.
work, other things, and
Totally.
you're not
Totally.
able to do that. You know, we weren't
Right.
able to do that
We
anymore.
were stuck at home with ourselves and we had to deal. Yeah.
Arguably the toughest monster to deal with.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. The toughest monster to deal with is yourself. Yes.
Man,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, do you have any advice? Because first of all, I think it's beautiful that you're telling your story about learning about a diagnosis so late, because that can feel so hard and scary because you've gone so much of your life
Oh yeah.
maybe not knowing about this, or just not knowing the language or the vocabulary,
Oh
let
yeah.
alone coping and how
Right.
that works. Do you have advice for people that maybe they aren't diagnosed yet, maybe they feel like something's wrong, maybe they
Yeah.
feel, or they just did, right? Like, for people learning about themselves later.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, the Romantics, back in the 18th century, right,
Hmm.
were reacting again. I mean, I don't want to go on a tangent here. It's not a tangent.
That's fine.
This actually goes right to the heart of your question. But the Enlightenment, in the 17th and 18th centuries, was this process by which there was the philosophy that everything in human experience could be explained, right?
Mm,
That everything had a rational explanation. And while that was a very good way of getting over the superstition and irrationality of the previous eras, right? Um, and an antidote against faith for those people who were not uh, 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 who are interested in finding rational explanations for things and not resorting to supernatural ones, right?
right, right.
That was good, but the Romantics rebelled against that because they said there is a part of human existence, there is a facet of what we do as people, which is a
Mm,
very important facet and a very large percentage of our psyches
mm,
that is irrational, chthonic, out of darkness, inexplicable.
mm,
And you don't get in touch with that aspect of yourself through logic and through science, right? You get
mm,
in touch with that through encounters with greatness, like untrammeled nature, storms, and it's the sea, and things like that. That they're really
yeah,
attracted to that,
yeah.
and you get it through confrontations with things that make you afraid, and you get it through immersion into the strange, into strange things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Enables you to get in touch with that aspect of yourself that is not reachable through logic, right?
Mm,
And Freud would pick up on those writings, and he eventually called that the unconscious. That's a
yeah,
bit reductive. It's a bit reductive in terms of what we're talking about here. But
no, it's
but
fine.
talk about the unconscious mind or the subconscious mind. Um, the Romantics were sort of prefiguring that in their own philosophies about this sort of aspect of yourself that you can't touch with your rational mind, that you need to be able to um, immerse yourself in the chthonic and the dark
Mm,
in order to touch that part of yourself. And that's an important part, right?
yeah,
It's not evil necessarily. to do that. It doesn't bring the evil out of you. It brings out parts of you that are hard to reconcile with your waking mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so monsters, every time we look at a monster, we're looking that right in the face. And so I would suggest that, I mean, I find this a lot, that your experience, Camille, that you just described, of being terrified of a particular monster and then recognizing that the reason why you were terrified of it is because you saw yourself in it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That happens a lot with my students. I ask them, what monster are they most afraid of, right? And they tell me, and I'm like, well, that can tell you something about yourself. I'm not a psychologist,
Right. Right.
but that can tell you something about yourself. Like, for instance, I have a lot of students who identify as queer who are
Yeah.
terrified of vampires. And I'm like, well, sure, absolutely. That makes perfect sense to me because
Right.
vampires are super queer, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful. And
Beautiful.
yes, absolutely.
Mhm. And then they
Oh
start to
my
identify
gosh.
with vampires, right? Once they get that,
Yeah. It's
right?
like a badge of honor. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh,
So I think that we should pay real attention to the things that we are afraid of because there's information there that's important. Yeah.
absolutely. Beautiful advice. Absolutely. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like just taking the time to like read some books, watch some cool shows or some
Mhm.
cool movies, and just kind of let yourself get lost in story and in narrative.
Absolutely.
And it's fun, and you give yourself almost that grace and patience
Exactly.
to explore with those characters and to
Mhm.
let go with those characters.
Mhm.
Because that's true. I mean, you're mentioning all of these very, very important psychological aspects of self-acceptance, and I feel like we're the hardest on ourselves. And
Yeah.
it's like that idea of shadow work, or that idea
Yeah.
of like, if you would you talk that way to your younger self, and things
Mhm.
like that. And I feel like the monster version of you, or the monster you're afraid of, is just like that.
Yeah.
um a monstrous version of shadow work.
Absolutely.
It's safe
Absolutely.
in a way. it's
Yeah.
it's a lot safer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should do clowns on my podcast. I haven't thought about clowns because clowns are scary.
Listen, and oh my god, like, just so wild. And granted, they are, um unfortunately, there have been, like, and I think the serial killers that dress like clowns don't
Totally.
help the fear
Nope.
very much.
Nope.
um but and I remember my dad introducing me. Well, it was introduced me very young. So was Poltergeist.
Mm.
And that little clown doll, that it was like a 2-minute scene with
Mhm.
a clown doll,
Totally. Yeah,
ma-
yeah.
made me lose my mind.
I bet.
Just lose my mind.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just interesting to go back and like read about said monster, think about
Mhm.
yourself, think about your own memories that maybe have been repressed, or things that you're just afraid of in yourself.
Yeah,
um and explore them.
exactly. Absolutely.
I'd listen to that podcast episode, let me tell
Oh,
you what,
good.
because that sounds fascinating to me.
Well, we did do one on La Llorona,
Ah,
so you might be interested in
really?
that one. Yeah.
Of course I would.
Yeah.
Yes, always. We love her.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Always do.
She's
She
amazing.
is.
Yeah.
She really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they see her a lot where I live now in Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
She shows up periodically. She's caused a few car accidents.
I mean,
She go drive.
I always put her on my altar. Like, she is forever there now. I respect her so much. And it was crazy, Michael, when I was, because she was, my thesis was all about her. And
Uh-huh.
every time I presented on her, it rained.
Oh my God.
A lot. Wherever I went, and not even just in Bowling Green. If I was like presenting work at other conferences,
Mhm. Mhm.
it poured, and I was just like, okay,
Wow.
okay, I think she's okay with this. I think
Well, she's
she's
crying.
right, right. Like, oh my gosh. But
Wow.
it's fun. It's
Yeah,
gosh, I love monsters so much.
that's
That's
intense.
so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, very
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if this hour-long episode isn't proof enough as to why you love werewolves so much, um, I don't know, why do they keep coming back to you, Michael? Why do you keep searching them out, or why are they so important to you?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I just got back from Germany actually, where I gave a paper on
Ooh.
werewolves, specifically on German werewolves, at a
Ooh.
conference at a university in Gießen, Germany, which is just
Wow.
north of Frankfurt, by about an hour north of Frankfurt. And I was I was very nervous about giving this paper because it was all about German werewolves, and I was worried that the German scholars were going to be there and be like, "Of course, why are you even saying this? Everybody knows this, right?"
Ah,
But
yeah, yeah.
specifically about the werewolves from the Middle Ages, from the 16th
Sure.
century. And so, but nobody knew anything about it.
Mm.
All the German scholars were like, "No, this is really new. This is really interesting stuff. Where did you find this?"
Oh
Right?
my gosh, yeah.
So it's been absolutely fascinating to engage with people about werewolves, and all monsters. I mean, I was in Montreal a week before that, giving a paper
Yeah.
on golems, and
Ah! How fun.
a week before that, I was in Salem giving a paper on vampires,
Oh my
and
god.
and later this summer, I'm going to go to Athens to give a paper on a play that's full of monsters called the Trachinae from Sophocles.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's incredible.
yeah.
Are you
So
kidding?
no, I mean this whole monster thing is really taking off for me. I don't...
As it should.
Thanks.
As it very well. Who better to talk about this stuff? And I also very much commend you for doing it because I think, depending on the conference, I guess, but even then, sometimes people don't take monsters very
No,
seriously.
that's true.
Right? Like it's
Yeah,
it's not seen, let alone, right? It's not seen as academic for many people.
that's right.
They don't think it exists in that world,
That's
but
right. Yeah.
they think it's fake. They think it's right,
Mhm.
like this idea of not real, so it's not important,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so I commend you so much for doing it and for proving that no, no, this is very important, highly academic, life-saving
Mhm.
stuff and research and studies. Like it's supposed to be talked about. We have to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the study of monsters is really interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
It can monster studies can creep up on any number of other disciplines.
Mm.
So the work that I do is becoming really interdisciplinary, and I'm working with a lot of scholars who are from completely different backgrounds than I am. But we're coming together to work on these particular topics. It's been really amazing. It has been
So
just amazing.
I love that. I also love too that just the idea that each of you, since you're all in different disciplines and what have you, could write about the same monster and write about completely different things,
Oh yeah.
which is so cool.
Oh, monsters are so rich and they're
Yeah.
so varied, right? And every manifestation of a monster is a little different from the one before it. And
Oh
so
yeah.
so they change over time. They have genealogies.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and the more we know about those genealogies, the more we know about ourselves,
Yeah.
our cultures, our societies, and ourselves as individuals as well,
Yeah.
and how we
It's
respond
it's
to
it's so important. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, brilliant. So cool. So freaking amazing.
them. Well, this has been really
Gosh.
fun. I don't want it to end.
I know, I know. See, I always feel this way too, but here's the thing. Just so you know, especially since you're an expert, you're always welcome back.
Oh, thank you.
We're exploring this since we're a young podcast, we're exploring this idea too of like having themed, sections of episodes, right? Where
Hmm.
like we could follow a certain theme, invite people back, right, to talk about different things,
Yeah,
genres, or maybe even episodes from a show that has a lot of monsters in, right? Like we could have
sure.
so much fun. So you're always welcome back
Oh, thank you,
anytime.
Camille. I'd be very happy to come back and talk to you about any monster
Yeah.
anytime. I'm not just about werewolves. I'm about all kinds of monsters.
All of them.
All of
All
them.
of them.
If it's a monster, it falls within my purview. So I'm happy to
Same
discuss
here.
it. Yeah.
Great, great.
Cool, cool.
Well, okay, so I know, and we have obviously been using werewolf interchangeably with monster, but do you think a werewolf is a monster, and why, Michael?
Oh yeah. so if you go back to Cohen, which is my touchstone for these sorts of things,
Always.
Cohen has these 7 theses that he brings up about monsters, and they really form for me 7 important questions to ask of a particular creature to see if it's a monster or not, right?
Yeah.
And one of the most important things is that they embody a contradictory self, right? So in other words,
Yeah.
they are part of a dialectic that's unstable. So, for instance, a
Mm.
vampire is both alive and dead, right? It has qualities of living creatures and it has qualities of dead creatures, right?
Yeah.
The Frankenstein monster or the cyborg or the robot are both natural and artificial, right? They have
Yeah.
natural qualities and artificial qualities. Those two things shouldn't go together, right? The
Right.
werewolf, of course, is the human and the beast, right? They're not supposed to go together, right?
Mm.
So they embody that dichotomy with instability, and that's where the pain comes from, right? You were talking about monsters being in pain. That's where the
Yeah.
pain comes from, is because it's really hard to do this, to be a human being and also be dead, or to be a human being and also be a beast, right?
Right.
You know, so,
Yeah.
and that's why monsters are so fragile. That's why when you hit them with something pure, they fall apart, right?
Mm.
Like sunlight on a vampire, right?
Mm.
It makes them revert to their true form, which is a dead body, right?
Yep.
Or a silver bullet in a werewolf is poisonous to them because it's pure, right? It's this
Right.
this concept of purity that destabilizes the unstable dichotomy, right?
Yep.
Now, if you have a creature that embodies these things in a stable way, that's a god or a superhero, right? So, for
Mm.
instance, Superman is part man and part god, right?
Right. Yeah.
Apollo was the god of healing, right? But he was
Mm.
also the god of plague. Now, how could he embody both of those things? Well, he can, because he transcends it. He's bigger than that, right?
Jeez.
But
Yeah.
if you're a normal human being trying to embody these things, you wind up in the monstrous realm, right?
Yes. Always.
So to me, the monster one an important quality of a monster is that they have to embody this contradiction in a
Mm.
way that is both illuminating to us about the nature of the contradiction, right? Because all these categories are false anyway. Human beings
Mm.
are animals, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Of course.
So these are false contradictions anyway. But so it helps us to understand that the contradictions are false, but it
Mm.
also does it in a way that's full of pathos, right? Which is why I object to the Twilight monsters, because they don't have pathos, right?
Right.
They don't embody this with pain.
No.
Edward Cullen is this vampire who figured out a way to drink uh, blood not from humans and
Right.
sparkles in the sunlight
Sparkle.
rather than
Things are pretty
fall
good.
apart. The worst thing about his life is that he has to be in high school forever,
Oh my
which
god.
is pretty awful. I mean, don't get me
Right.
wrong,
Sounds terrible. Right.
right? But he's cool, right? I mean, she thinks he's
Yeah.
cool. And Jacob is the
Yeah.
same way. There's very little pain involved in what Jacob has to do with his life as a werewolf, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Jacob and Edward aren't monsters. They are. They call themselves monsters. They identify as monsters, so they are monsters, right?
Yeah.
I just they're not to my taste.
Yeah. Which is fine.
But they are important.
Honestly.
They're important
Yeah.
because a lot of people, cut their teeth in monster culture through Twilight, right? So don't get me wrong. I don't think it's very good, but I do think it's important.
In its own way.
Yeah,
Yeah. In its own way. Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Twilight, man, it's one of those complicated things.
yeah.
Obviously, when I was introduced to it as a 12-year-old girl,
Well,
I
you're the
lost my
target
mind.
audience, of course, of course.
Oh, I
Yeah.
was like, "Are you kidding?" Right? Like, this is great. But, I was talking to my best friend Natalie, who actually designed the image for Floaties for
Oh, I love
Krakens.
that image.
I'll tell her. I love her so much. And we were having this discussion the other day about Twilight and how we realized, too, on a human level, they didn't really teach us about monsters. They actually taught us about problematic
Mm.
men.
Yes.
And we didn't know that as middle school girls.
Hmm.
We thought stalking and control,
Hmm.
and right, we could have a whole other podcast episode about
Oh,
Twilight,
totally,
but
absolutely.
there's some romanticization of things that aren't
Mm.
really good.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. Yeah. Because all
right?
monsters disobey their creators, right? They all do.
Yeah.
And the relationship between Edward Cullen and uh oh, who wrote Twilight?
Oh,
I can't believe I just blanked on her.
Stephanie Meyer?
Stephanie
Is that
Meyer.
right? Is
Right.
that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that he does things I think that she doesn't intend for him to do, and romanticizing stalker behavior and abusive, controlling, masculine, toxic masculinity is one of
Yeah.
those things that I don't think she intended for him to embody, but he does.
He does.
He definitely
Fully.
does. He's
Yeah.
he's. I mean, I wrote a little essay. I wrote a little essay about Twilight.
Did you?
I did, which I'll link. I'll give you a link to that.
Yes, please. Any and all of your writings, Michael. Send them over. We're
Okay.
linking them all.
All right.
Great, good. But yes, this I think you're absolutely right. This play on contradiction is very important.
Hmm.
Embodying both.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
gosh,
humans
so
are like
great.
that. Humans are full of contradictions, right? And
Yeah.
so we want to see that represented in our media. We want to see that represented in a way that we can reflect off of, right? It's
Yes.
so
Yeah.
important. It's so important. Like you said,
Always.
representation.
Yeah. Seeing yourself. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And I think people need to be trained to see themselves in monsters.
Mm,
But people are nevertheless attracted to monsters, even if they
mm,
don't understand that.
yeah.
And because people love monsters, everybody loves monsters, right?
Yeah. How
And
can you
you
not?
How can you not? But you have to ask why. Why do we love monsters so much? And I think that it's because of this. It's because they represent the holes that we experience in our own humanity, right? Yeah.
You need to face those. Yeah.
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 Well, I know obviously if I was talking to 5-year-old Michael, he would be like, "Yeah, werewolves are scary." How do you think werewolves are scary now? And if you do, how? In what way?
Yeah, I think they're totally scary.
Yeah.
I am still I'm still scared by werewolves, but I think that fear I experience now as a kind of thrill.
Mm.
So, in my book, The Monster in Theater History, plug, um,
Yes, yes.
I talk about there are actually 6 different kinds of fear, right?
Mm,
That we can experience, and we call them by different names: fright, panic, terror, um, and so on, dread and anxiety, right? And they're all
mm,
different. Those are all very, very different emotions, right? But we categorize them all under fear, right? But
right.
horror is a little different. Horror is as much an aesthetic reaction as it is an emotional or psychological one, right?
Mm,
So it needs a very specific kind of stimulus in order to generate this feeling of horror, right? And that
yeah.
and that stimulus again is lies in the contradictory nature of the object that you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
That it cannot exist somehow, and yet it does, and that violates your sense of complacency about who you are and how the universe works, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if a vampire exists, then my whole definition of what's alive and what's dead has to be revisited, and that's
Right.
really hard, right? How
Yes.
can I do
Yes.
that? And it's also really, really good for you to do that, right? To
Always.
question your
Always.
assumptions, right? So I think that's what attracts us to the monsters, is
Mm,
that all monsters embody this process,
yeah.
you know. And so you
Yes.
can, and luckily there are so many different monsters. You can go and find the one that scares you the most or that thrills you the most, right? But yeah,
It's fun.
I do not miss werewolf movies now. Anytime there's a werewolf movie, I go see it.
Oh, that's so good for you.
Yeah,
That's so amazing. What growth.
yeah, there's a lot of growth.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's so great. I love it.
How
I
about
love
you
it.
and clowns? Do you still avoid them, or do you embrace them?
It's a mixture. It's a mixed bag.
Hmm.
Like I did, I did end up watching it mostly like with my hands like this. But, I did it and
Yeah.
I had never seen the new one
Mm.
until recently.
Yeah.
um and it was scary, but I like I find myself to start getting thrilled of thinking about, oh, like, and maybe it's also the performance and theater kid in me too, but the thrill of learning how to play a character like that,
Mm.
and like learning the layers of this
Mhm.
being, of this entity.
Totally.
And then again, when you mentioned, right, kind of this idea of something pure is typically what destroys monsters in
Hmm.
almost every case.
Right.
And then, like, specifically with Pennywise, I'm fascinated by this idea that the children just have to not believe in him
Yeah.
anymore. It's
Right.
as simple as that, right?
Hmm.
Like, we don't believe in you
Right.
anymore.
Right.
And that's fascinating to me.
Mhm.
So, I like you, I find thrill in it. I get excited. I do find myself getting immersed and getting lost
Mm.
in how this character, how this monster functions and is and exists.
Mhm.
But it's hard. It's
It's
still
hard.
very
Yeah.
scary.
Sure. Absolutely. But that's growth.
It's
That's
growth.
growth. And to recognize that the things that we scare us are good for us, right? That we should
Yes.
approach them, rather
Yes.
than be push them away, right?
Yeah.
We should move closer to the things that scare us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be scary. You may get burned a little, right?
Mm.
It's going to be tough, but you learn.
Yeah.
You learn a lot.
And I think that's
Yeah.
another lesson that can be extrapolated out to, human social interaction as well, right? That we should move towards people that scare us as well, right?
Mm,
That somebody, oh, well, this person from this, say, ethnic minority, I've
mm,
only heard bad things about them, well, you should
mm.
move towards that, you know,
Yeah.
allow that fear to be
Yes.
your guide to actually engage with a real human being, and then you see that it's a lot more complicated than that, right? Just like with
So much
monsters.
more.
Yeah.
So much more. And you'll realize how much you have in common,
Yeah.
I think,
Exactly.
too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe people are like monsters now that I
Yeah.
now that you mention it.
It's funny, and I love that that answer will probably always change for you, which is good.
It's
That's always
always
good.
it's always in flux. It's
Yeah,
always changing.
always.
Yeah. It's very exciting.
Well, obviously everything you've mentioned pays homage to your study of monsters and why you love them so much. Why do you think, whether it's monsters in general or like the idea of monster studies, right, and teaching about monsters, why should this keep going? Why should people have continuous conversations about monsters, about monstrosity? And that can be in any case, right? Just day to day people talking about it,
Hmm.
in an academic setting, right,
Hmm.
in a work setting.
Yeah.
Why is it important?
I think that the day when racism no longer exists in our culture, the day that sexism no longer exists, ageism, ableism, um, these forms of entrenched and institutionalized discrimination
Yeah,
against anybody who is not seen to be normal, right?
yeah.
To be the is what oh, who was it who called it, or he wrote a wonderful book called The Tyranny of the Normal, and I can't remember the name right off.
Ooh, that sounds amazing.
It's a great book. I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but The Tyranny of the
That's okay.
Normal.
That's okay.
Um, uh, when all of that is done, and then when we are also reconciled to our own inner psychological contradictions,
Yeah.
on that day, there will be no need to study monsters anymore.
Mm.
They won't affect us anymore. We'll just be like, oh, that's just silly. But until that day, we need to study them
Yeah.
because we need to learn about how to fix that, how to fix all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
How it operates. And I think that hatred operates best when it's invisible, right? When
Mm.
it's naturalized, when you don't
Yeah.
realize that you're engaging in hate, that's when
Yes.
it's at its most pernicious. And so it's the work of scholars and artists to make the invisible visible, right? To
Mm.
make people understand that the processes but that make them hate are just processes, right? That they can be they're scripts that can be written or written against, right?
Mm.
We can cure this, and we
Mm.
can cure it through the study of monsters. I really believe
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
Little bits at a time, right?
Sure.
It's not going to be
Sure.
overnight that we're going to fix it, but I think that one of the ways of combating discrimination and hatred is through the study of monsters. I really deeply believe that.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more. Monsters are lighthouses, and we'll never stop saying that, people. That's what they are.
Hmm.
They help, and they're frightening, but in a good way.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
a good way.
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we're at the last question,
Okay.
Michael. But all that being said, okay, if you were just chilling in California right now, relaxing, maybe it's a Saturday still,
Yeah, yeah,
and you get a knock on the door,
yeah.
and it turns out there's a werewolf
Mm.
there.
Hmm.
What would you do? What would you say? How would you react in that
I would
situation?
I would hug it.
Oh my god. That's beautiful.
I would hug it. Yeah,
Why?
because it's me. Right? And it
Yeah.
needs love.
Yeah.
The best way to fight monsters is with love.
Always.
That's the best way, right? The second best way is through semiotic analysis.
I hope that's at the top of every single one of your syllabi because that's fantastic. You're right.
Then if those two don't work, then you can bring in the wooden stakes and the silver bullets, right?
It just depends. It depends on the year, what students you're getting. Yeah,
Exactly. But love, I think, is the first one.
I think it not only is a way to defend yourself, but a way to love yourself. And I
Yeah,
think that's what's so amazing about it.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Embrace your inner monster. It's really good for you.
always.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Because that's how you take the evil out of it, Monsters can be evil. There's no question that they can be evil. But
100%.
like Frankenstein's monster said to Frankenstein, he said, I was good and the world made me evil. You made me evil by abandoning me, right?
Mm,
If you treat me like the son that I deserve to be treated like, I will be virtuous again. Make me happy and
mm,
again be virtuous, he said, right?
mm.
So love it's all about love.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is a beautiful way to. I feel like love is always louder than hatred in that way too. Um,
Well, I don't
well,
know
you
if it's
try it.
louder, but it lasts, hopefully it lasts longer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. It does the most, and I think that's what's so beautiful about it, especially with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So the study of monsters is as much personal as it is cultural. You know.
always
Yeah. Totally feel that way.
amazing.
This episode of Floaties for Krakens was written and recorded by me, Camille Maria Costa. A monstrous thank you to Dr. Michael Chemers for such a rad interview. A big thank you to Michael Kosman for producing a stellar episode, and a huge thank you to Natalie Hedberg for designing such a phenomenal logo. And music for the show is also written and produced by me, with a special appearance by my tata, Toby Acosta. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's show. It truly means everything to me. If you have questions or curiosities about the research or media referenced in this episode, everything will hopefully be in the description box. And you can find us on our website or our socials, links in the descriptions as well. Anyway, thanks again for being here, everyone. And just a reminder, it's okay to be afraid of the monster, but it's also okay to love the heck out of it too. Keep being monstrous and keep shining bright.